Attorney General Barr gearing up to release a redacted version of the Mueller report to Congress, which he says could come as soon as this week. Joining me now for a little more insight on all of this, former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Bob Bianchi. Bob, thanks for joining us. I want to just kind of kick things off with how excited are you to see this report?
Molly, I'm like a kid that's waiting for Santa Claus on Christmas. The anticipation is unbelievable, and my only hope is it's not going to be gift wrapped in impossible paper to get off, to get to the present. That is by overly redacting the report. Everyone on both sides, Democrat, Republican, those that are in between, those who don't care, are entitled to know as much information as they can get on what I think is going to be an amazing insight into how the federal government operates and into the Trump campaign and all of these issues.
When we talk about that side of things, the Trump campaign, there was a considerable criticism on the part of the Attorney General talking about whether or not it was warranted. He used the word spying at one point. But the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has essentially said that they're ready for this. Take a listen.
We're ready, and we'll be ready for anything they throw at us. I suspect it'll be nothing that we're not prepared for, or haven't thought of, or the president hasn't thought of. And we were ready for it 3 months ago. And the reality is there was no collusion. It's a joke, but it's worse than a joke. It was a setup. It was a specific conspiracy to frame him. I think the facts are starting to come in on that.
You know, he seems to be kind of enjoying getting the chance to say this at this point in time. What do you think is in there? Do you think the White House should be at all concerned?
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember something. Just because they don't come up with a conspiracy, which would be the charge, or collusion or obstruction, by proof beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 jurors as a guy who led an agency, that's the standard, doesn't mean, for example, that there's going to be damaging information in there, i.e., well, you may not be able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, but there's significant evidence to show untoward conduct. So it has political ramifications if, in fact, that is what is determined. And, you know, it's interesting to me, this concept, and I'm just calling it like I see it as a person who runs an agency, not as a politician, is that if those guys were trying to do something to frame the president while this investigation was going on during the election, it's befuddling as to why they wouldn't have leaked that information out, because it could have been very damaging if it got out to the public that, in addition to everything else, he may be, that is Trump or Trump campaign, colluding with the Russians. Rather, what they did really was put out public statements that were very detrimental to Hillary Clinton. So I just never got that from a standpoint of common sense, Molly.
Yeah, you talk about the political ramifications, potentially redactions, what people might spin, those, you know, we won't know what's in those blacked out lines and how people will spin that. There's quite a bit of things that are supposedly going to be redacted, grand jury material, source and methods, that sort of thing. But here's the Attorney General on that matter.
Have you overruled Mr. Mueller or his team on any redaction question?
No.
One way or the other?
No.
Have you discussed any specific redactions with the White House?
No.
So it seems like nobody has some insight into exactly what will not be revealed in this report. So what do you think will be those things that we'll discuss the most that may be under those black lines?
First, Molly, it is heartening, a positive sign that the Attorney General, because he is a political appointee, is not getting in the redaction process. That gives me some distance to say I believe that the Mueller team will do what they're supposed to do the right way. I think most of us in the country have confidence in him. My number one thing that I'm looking for, Molly, in the report is the declination of prosecutions. That is, those who they decided not to prosecute, those who were investigated, and why they made decisions not to prosecute. And the two that would come to mind mostly for me would be that Trump Tower meeting on June 9th of 2016 with Donald Trump Jr. and with Jared Kushner. What were the conclusions with respect to that? Why did the Mueller team punt on the obstruction charge? Now, I want to see how they were basically doing their report. What did they think that there was their responsibility to do? Because it seems odd to us all that they would leave it to, again, a political appointee. And then I want to know whether or not they made...
I was going to say we're getting the wrap, but I believe you will not be the only one flipping to certain pages of this report and looking for some of those highlights. Bob Bianchi, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Molly.
Appreciate it.
Well, this week we're going to take a deeper look at all these issues with Robert Ray. He was independent counsel from 1999 to 2002. He was also a federal prosecutor and is now partner at Thompson & Knight. And Caroline Polisi. She's a partner at Pierce Bainbridge and is representing former Trump advisor George Papadopoulos, who pled guilty to lying to the FBI in the Russia probe. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Robert Ray, if I could start with you. Big flap over the Attorney General's observation that there was spying going on. Was it spying?
Well, crocodile tears, I suppose, from the Democrats. The word choice is obviously what the Democrats seized upon, but I think the Attorney General was quite clear in the clip that you played and also the rest of his testimony that really what he was referring to is the fact that there's no dispute about the fact that electronic surveillance was authorized. It was authorized by the FISA court. What he's talking about is whether, as he indicated, whether there was an adequate predicate for doing so, whether proper procedures were followed, and also your lead-in suggests, of course, the momentous issue of using the full arm of law enforcement authority by one administration directed against a presidential candidate from the other party.
Now, is that okay? Is it okay for a government to do that if it has probable cause?
And under the law, of course, nobody's suggesting that anybody under those circumstances is above the law. But it does raise a serious question, which is really why you have an investigation to find out, and that is whether politics and prosecution have mixed. The FBI is free to go out there and investigate whomever it chooses, but when it directs, again, the full resources of the United States government against a presidential campaign, it better have, as you suggest, a very good reason for doing so. Because it involves a presidential candidate, it should be something that is carefully controlled through proper procedures in the Department of Justice. And that's, by the way, the whole reason why right now, as we speak, the Inspector General for the Department of Justice, Michael Horowitz, who is an Obama appointee, confirmed with the advice and consent of the Senate, is conducting an investigation that Attorney General Barr also indicated would likely conclude in May or June of this year with a report. Once that report is received, then what you would expect to happen is the Department of Justice at the highest level, including the Attorney General, would conduct an appropriate investigation if one needs to be conducted to decide whether or not any crimes are committed and also whether or not proper procedures were followed.
As you said, there's going to be that investigation of the investigation. There is an investigation of the investigation going on. Caroline, if I can ask you, because actually your client was in some ways involved in the initiation of this investigation, if you like, and we need to get into too much detail about that. But how did this investigation get started? The Democrats say, well, it was a perfectly legitimate. It was all started because they had legitimate reasons for suspecting that the Russian government was intervening in some way and collaborated with the Trump campaign. Republicans say not at all. It was a bunch of partisan Democrats in the Obama administration who were actually trying to undermine a political opponent. How did it get started?
Right. Well, the short answer is I don't know. I know just as much as you do. I think the narrative out there is that it was sort of kicked off by my client, George Papadopoulos, by something that he mentioned in Europe at the time about dirt on Hillary Clinton, and that, the thing that most people don't necessarily understand is that it was started as a counterintelligence investigation, not necessarily sort of a prosecutorial criminal investigation. But, there was a lot of questionable, I think there are questions surrounding the surveillance that was taking place at the time, and I absolutely agree with you. It is undeniable that there was predicated, I think, surveillance going on. In Georgia's statement of the offense, it states they had a judicially authorized search warrant to get his Facebook accounts, to get things of that nature.
That would have to be approved by a judge.
Absolutely.
And all of FISA judge. No, that wasn't a FISA judge.
But absolutely, there was surveillance of this nature going on, and I agree that you can split hairs over the term spying or unauthorized surveillance or authorized surveillance, but the issue is that this was taking place, and I agree. Michael Horowitz's sort of reputation in this industry is probably as unassailable as Robert Mueller's, in that he is not going to pull any punches in his final report. So we have the whole point of an IG is to investigate the investigators, to have a neutral branch sort of looking into the things that were taking place at the Department of Justice. I think that's what's going to happen.
And in the unassailable category, I would add Bill Barr, but of course the Democrats have seen political traction to be gained by trying to undermine Bill Barr in this period before the Mueller report comes out.
Would you characterize it as he did as spying, that it was the federal government spying on a political campaign?
Well, let me just, I think there are other clues here about, his testimony that shouldn't be missed. indicated also that an appropriate investigation would not just be limited to the Department of Justice. He also suggested that one of the things that they would be looking at would be the intelligence apparatus that fed into the FBI's contributions here. So I don't think he's talking about just the FBI. It suggested to me that they're going to have a good long look at where did this originate from, by whom, what were they asking for, right, who was supervising this. And I will also say, the point of an investigation is not just simply when it ultimately is conducted to determine whether or not crimes were committed, but it's like best practices in any internal investigation that anybody in the private sector has ever conducted. Lawyers do this all the time, really to find out were the procedures followed. If they weren't, why not? Are the procedures correct? Could the procedures for the future be enhanced? All of which is a concern about, again, being careful about whether politics played any role in the decision-making process.